The largest animal that has ever lived is awake right now, somewhere in the dark, 300 meters down. Its heart is beating twice a minute. We first heard that heartbeat in the year 2019, and we still do not know where these animals go to have their babies. Before we continue, just wanted to let you know that we have heard your feedback and we're now on Spotify. Go through the link in the description to join us there for a rich listening experience. Let me start with the size, and then let me take it away from you. A blue whale can reach 30 meters. The heaviest one ever properly weighed came to 190 tons. Not estimated from a photograph, weighed. That is heavier than every dinosaur we have ever found, including the enormous long-necked ones you were shown as a child. The ones that were supposed to be the final word on how large a living thing can get. They were not the final word. The final word is alive. It is out there tonight, breathing. And here is the thing that I cannot get past. The thing that makes this animal genuinely strange rather than merely large. Almost nobody has ever seen one. You can picture a blue whale. Everyone can. You have a shape in your head right now, and it is roughly correct. But you have never seen one, and the odds are that you never will. And this is true of nearly every person who has ever lived on this planet. 8 billion of us. The largest creature in the history of life is sharing the planet with us at this exact moment, and it is functionally invisible. Compare that to almost anything else. Elephants have been in circuses. Lions have been in Roman arenas. Tigers, bears, gorillas, sharks. We have caught them, kept them, fought them, put them on television. Even the giant squid, that famous phantom of the deep, has been filmed alive. Nobody has ever kept a blue whale. Nobody could. There is no aquarium in the world that could hold one, and there never will be. This animal has never been in a zoo, never performed, never been fed by hand, never been touched by a person who wanted it to live. So why can nobody find them? Because they do not live where we live. Blue whales are offshore animals. They are out in the open ocean, in deep water, far past the shelf, in the parts of the map that have no features on them at all. They do not gather at coastlines. They do not follow boats. There are a handful of places where you can reliably see them. The Gulf of California, the Gulf of St. Lawrence, a few others. And outside of those, finding one is largely a matter of enormous patience and reasonable luck. And they are not sociable, at least not in the way we recognize. You do not find pods of 30 blue whales. You find one, sometimes two. They are enormous solitary things moving through enormous empty water, and the ocean is very good at hiding a 30-meter animal, which is a sentence that should not make sense and does. Then there is the surface problem. A blue whale spends most of its life below. It comes up to breathe, and that is all. It blows, it takes air, it goes down again, and while it is down there, it is invisible to every instrument we have, except sound. So the animal you are picturing, the great blue shape suspended in clear water, is not really the animal. That is what it looks like in the 4 seconds a year that it is available to be looked at. The rest of it, the actual life, happens in the dark. And that is why our knowledge of them is so young, not young by the standards of science, young by the standards of a person. The first blue whale heart that was ever preserved went on display in the year 2017. Before that, nobody had ever kept one. Nobody had ever had the chance. The first time anyone measured a blue whale's heart rate was the year 2019. Not the first time we understood it. The first time we measured it, a team put a sensor on the back of one in Monterey Bay and got a number, and that number had never existed before in human history. 19 years ago, we had a rover on Mars. In 2019, we finally worked out how fast the heart beats in the largest animal that has ever lived. And the most remarkable gap of all is still open. We do not know where they breed. Not for the southern populations. It is thought to be somewhere in the deep tropical water, in the South Pacific, or the Atlantic, or the Indian Ocean? And if that sounds like a reasonable answer, notice that it is 3 oceans, and it covers half the planet. Nobody has ever observed a blue whale giving birth. Nobody has ever watched 2 of them mate. The most fundamental fact about any animal, where it comes from, is missing for this one. So this is not a video about a big fish. It is not a nature documentary where the mystery gets solved in the last 10 minutes. This is the strangest situation in biology. There is an animal larger than any dinosaur, alive, in enormous numbers of tons, in an ocean we have mapped from orbit, and it is a stranger to us. We have been in the same room with it for our entire existence as a species, and we have never been introduced. Tonight we are going to find out what we do know. Some of it is going to be wrong, including something you almost certainly believe already. The wrong thing comes later. First, the size, because you cannot understand anything else about this animal until the number is properly lodged in you. 190 tons. Now let me give you the comparison that actually matters, because it is not a bus or a jumbo jet. It is the thing you were promised as a child. Argentinosaurus, the long-necked one from the wall chart, the one striding through a Cretaceous fern forest with a body like a cathedral. A study published in the year 2023 ranked it as the most massive dinosaur we know of and gave it a weight of about 76 tons. 76. The blue whale is more than twice that. Not slightly larger, not a photo finish. The largest land animal that ever lived would not make half a blue whale, and you could take 2 of them, put them on the scale together, and still not reach the number. Everything you were taught about giants was a warm-up. And it gets better, because for about 7 months, this title was in genuine doubt, and the way it was won back is one of the best scientific arguments of the decade. In August of 2023, a team working in the Ica Desert in Peru published a paper in Nature describing a fossil whale, Pericetus colossus, the colossal whale from Peru. It lived around 38 to 40 million years ago, and it was not long, only about 17 to 20 meters. But the bones that came out of that rocky slope were extraordinary. 13 vertebrae, 4 ribs, a hip bone, and every one of them absurdly thick, dense, and heavy. The skeleton alone was estimated at 5 to 7 tons, more than twice the skeleton of a blue whale. Working from that, the team estimated the animal's total weight at around 180 tons, with a possible range running from 85 all the way up to 340, which meant the blue whale might not be the champion after all. The headlines went around the world. A new heaviest animal in the history of Earth, and it was a short, fat thing from a Peruvian desert. Then, in February of 2024, 2 paleontologists took the numbers apart. Ryosuke Motani at the University of California, Davis, and Nicholas Pyenson at the Smithsonian, published in the journal Piaget, and their objection was beautifully simple. They did not argue about the fossils, they argued about the physics. If Pericetus really weighed 180 tons at 17 meters long, then it was impossibly dense. Motani's point was that an animal that heavy for its size would have had to fight the water constantly just to exist. It could not have floated. It could not have rested at the surface to breathe. It would have needed to swim continuously against gravity in order to do anything at all, which is not a lifestyle, it is a punishment. So they recalculated, using the shape and volume of the body rather than extrapolating from bone weight, and the answer came back at 60 to 70 tons. A large animal, a very large animal, nowhere near a blue whale, and closer in weight to a sperm whale. The title came home. And that, I think, is the more interesting story. Not that the blue whale is the biggest, that we tested it, seriously, with the best fossil evidence anyone has ever had, and the blue whale won on a technicality of buoyancy. Which brings us to the real question, and it is the one nobody asks. Why the ocean? Because it is not a coincidence that the largest animal is a swimmer, and that the largest land animals stopped so far short. The reason is that a body on land is a building, and a body in water is not. Everything about being enormous on land is a structural problem. Legs are columns. Bone is compression material. Every kilogram you add has to be carried by the legs, and the strength of a leg goes up with its cross-sectional area, while the weight it carries goes up with volume, and those two do not scale together. Double the size of a land animal, and you roughly double its bone strength and roughly increase its weight eightfold. The arithmetic runs out. That is why an elephant's legs look like tree trunks, and a gazelle's look like pencils. That is why Argentinosaurus was the shape it was. Somewhere past 70 or 80 tons, an animal on land becomes a structure that spends all of its energy holding itself up and then falls over. Now take that animal and put it in the sea. The weight simply goes away. Water pushes up with a force equal to the water the body displaces. And a whale is very close to the density of the sea it lives in, which means it is effectively weightless. It does not hold itself up, it floats. The skeleton is no longer a scaffold under load. It is a frame for muscles to pull against, and the whole compression problem the dinosaurs were fighting does not exist. There are no legs. There is nothing to break. The blue whale has never once in its life had to bear its own weight. That is the trick. That is the whole trick. It is not that whales are stronger, or better built, or more evolved. It is that they moved into the only place on Earth where being 190 tons costs you nothing at all, or almost nothing, because there is a price for being this size, and it is not structural, and we did not find it until 2019. But first, the lie in the name. The blue whale is not blue. That is not a technicality. It is not a matter of shade or lighting or opinion. Pull one out of the water and put it on a beach in daylight, which people have done thousands of times, and what you are looking at is grey. A soft, cool, mottled grey, sometimes leaning blue, sometimes leaning almost slate. Not a solid colour at all. The skin is dappled all over with pale spots and patches, like the surface of a stone or a sky just breaking up after rain. The blue is the water's doing. Here is what actually happens when you see one from a boat. The whale is below you, a few meters down, and there is a whole layer of sea between your eye and its back. Seawater eats light, and it eats it selectively. Red goes first, in the first few meters, then orange, then yellow. What survives longest, what travels furthest down and comes back up again, is blue. So by the time the light has gone down to the animal, bounced off its grey skin, and come back to your eye, everything else has been stripped out of it. Only the blue is left. You are not seeing the whale. You are seeing the water, with a whale-shaped hole in it. Lift the same animal into the air, and the colour falls off it instantly, and what is left is grey and a little disappointing. And every whaler who ever hauled one onto a deck knew this, which is why they never called it the blue whale. They called it the sulphur bottom. And that name is a window into something genuinely strange, because the sulphur bottom is not a poetic description, it is a literal one. The belly of a blue whale is often stained a dirty yellow. The reason is that the largest animal on Earth is quietly covered in plants, diatoms. Single-celled algae, microscopic, each one wrapped in a little glass shell of silica, and they exist in enormous numbers in cold water. In the Antarctic and the far north, they form a film on anything that stays down there long enough, and a blue whale spending a season in polar water accumulates a coating of them across its underside. They are yellow, so the whale is yellow, underneath at least. So the actual animal, the honest description of the largest creature in the history of life, is this. It is grey. It is dappled like a stone. It has a yellow belly from a coat of algae. It looks blue only because it is underwater. which is the same reason the sky looks blue, which is to say for no reason having anything to do with the thing itself. The name is a report on the viewing conditions. Now, here is why I have spent a chapter on this, because it is not just a bit of trivia to enjoy at a dinner party. That mottling is the only reason we know anything about these animals as individuals. You cannot tag them all, you cannot follow them. But the pattern of pale patches on a blue whale's flank is unique to that whale, the way a fingerprint is unique to you. It does not change. It stays with the animal for its entire life. So researchers photograph them. That is it. That is the technology. A camera, a boat, a great deal of waiting, and a picture of a flank as the animal rolls to dive. And then those photographs go into a catalogue, and the catalogue is compared against every other photograph anyone has ever taken anywhere in that ocean. And if the pattern matches, you have found the same whale twice. That is how we know they migrate. That is how we know how long they live. That is how we know that a specific whale seen off California in 1 decade is the same specific whale seen somewhere else years later. Every single thing we understand about the movements of blue whales in a species that leaves no tracks in an ocean with no landmarks comes from photographing the skin and matching the freckles, which means the mottling is not decoration. It is the filing system. It is the only handle we have ever managed to get on them, and I love that this is what it came down to. The largest animal that has ever lived, an animal we cannot capture, cannot keep, cannot follow, and can barely find. And the way we finally started keeping track of them was the same way you would keep track of a school of children on a trip. You look at their faces. You remember which one is which. So the name is wrong, and the color is a trick of the light, and the belly is yellow with algae, and the grey dapple that nobody bothers to mention is the most useful thing about the animal, which leaves the largest and most surprising correction still to come, because the size, the thing we have been sitting with for 2 chapters now, is also not what you think it is. The blue whale has not always been the largest animal on Earth. For almost the whole of its family's history, it was nothing special at all. 4.5 million years ago, there was no such thing as a giant whale. Not a smaller one, not a slightly less impressive one. Nothing in that ocean was anything like the animal we have been talking about. The biggest whales on the planet were about 10 meters long, which is a large animal, and is also less than 1/3 of a blue whale, and would not have turned a head. That is the finding. And when it was published, it surprised almost everyone who works on this. In May of 2017, 3 scientists put out a paper in Proceedings of the Royal Society B. Graham Slater at the University of Chicago, Jeremy Goldbogen at Stanford, and Nicholas Pyenson at the Smithsonian. They took the fossil record of baleen whales, which runs back more than 30 million years, and they measured the bodies, and then they modeled how size had changed through all of that time. Everyone expected one of 2 shapes in the data. Either whales got big early and stayed big, or they got big gradually, creeping upward over tens of millions of years, the way things usually do. They did neither. The graph is almost flat. For most of their history, baleen whales knocked around at moderate sizes, wandering up and down a little, going nowhere in particular. Then, around 4.5 million years ago, the line turns and goes up like a wall. Slater's own description was that they went from relatively big to ginormous, and it happened several times over, on different branches of the family tree, at roughly the same moment. Blue whales, fin whales, right whales, all becoming enormous independently, all at once. That is not inheritance. That is not one lucky lineage. That is the entire ocean handing out the same instruction to several unrelated animals in the same geological instant. At the same time, the small whale species started disappearing. So the question becomes obvious. What happened 4.5 million years ago? The ice happened. The Earth was cooling. It was entering the cycle of glaciations that would define the next few million years. ice sheets pushing out from both poles, and the whole circulation of the ocean rearranged itself. Seasonal upwelling intensified along the coasts. Meltwater and nutrients poured into the sea in spring and summer, and the food changed. Not the amount of it, the arrangement. This is the part that matters, and it is genuinely elegant. Before the ice, the ocean's prey was spread out, fairly even, fairly reliable, distributed thinly across enormous areas. You could swim through it, more or less anywhere, and find a modest amount of something to eat. After the ice, that ended. What replaced it was patchiness. Explosive seasonal blooms of krill and small animals, unbelievably dense, concentrated into particular places at particular times of year, and separated by enormous stretches of ocean containing almost nothing at all. The ocean stopped being a field and became a series of feasts with famine in between. And that single change is the reason the blue whale exists. Because if food is spread thinly and evenly, being enormous is a terrible idea. You have a vast body to run and no way to fill it faster than anyone else. Every mouthful is small. You starve magnificently. But if food comes in dense patches, everything inverts. Now the animal with the biggest mouth wins, because a huge mouth in a thick swarm of krill takes in an absurd amount in one go, and Goldbogen's work on modern whales shows exactly this. Filter feeding gets more efficient the denser the prey, and it gets more efficient still as the body gets bigger, and there is a second advantage that seals it. The patches are far apart. A bigger animal travels faster and cheaper between them. It can afford the journey from one feast to the next, and it can afford to go without in between, because a large body carries large reserves. So the Ice Age did not make whales big. The Ice Age made the ocean lumpy, and lumpy oceans reward giants. Which leaves us with a sentence from Goldbogen that I keep returning to. We live in a time of giants. Baleen whales have never been this big, ever. Read that carefully, because it does something to the whole story. The blue whale is not an ancient wonder. It is not a survivor from some lost age of monsters. It is the newest thing in the sea. In 30 million years of whales, this is the first moment there has ever been an animal like this, and we happen to be alive during it. We did not miss the age of giants. We are standing in it. And the paper that established all this ends on a line that should probably have been louder than it was. The authors point out that these animals depend entirely on dense, patchy prey, that a changing ocean threatens exactly that arrangement, and they describe the great whales as operating on an energetic knife edge. A knife edge. The largest animals that have ever existed, balanced on the specific shape of a food supply that only appeared 4.5 million years ago, and is not guaranteed to stay, which raises the question of what that balance actually costs. And the answer to that was sitting inside the chest of every blue whale on Earth, uncounted and unmeasured until quite recently. Nobody had ever weighed the heart. You have been told that a blue whale's heart is the size of a small car. You may have been told that you could crawl through its arteries, or even swim through them. Both of those are wrong, and I can prove it, because in 2014, somebody finally got hold of one and put it on a scale. Here is how that happened, and it begins badly. That spring, off the west coast of Newfoundland, 9 blue whales became trapped in ice and died. 9, in one event. That is not a curiosity, that is a catastrophe. And the researchers who worked on it afterwards estimated that this single incident removed around 3% of the entire Northwest Atlantic blue whale population. Some of the bodies came ashore. One of them, a female of about 76 tons, ended up on the beach at a place called Trout River, and the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto saw the only opportunity of its kind that anybody had ever had. Because this is the thing about blue whales. When they die at sea, they sink. The body goes down into the deep and becomes a feast for everything that lives on the bottom, and it is gone. Intact blue whale carcasses in a place you can reach, in a condition you can work with, essentially do not happen. In the entire history of anatomy, nobody had ever preserved a blue whale heart, not because nobody wanted to, but because nobody had ever been able to. So a team went to Trout River, and for 4 days they worked inside the chest of a dead whale. Jacqueline Miller, a mammalogy technician at the museum, led that part of the work, and the descriptions of it are not glamorous. Elbow deep, 4 days, cutting a hole into the chest cavity and eventually needing 4 people to physically push the organ out through it. And then they had it. The first blue whale heart anyone had ever recovered whole. Now, the museum, quite reasonably, had been preparing for the display. They knew the story. Everybody knows the story. Heart the size of a car. So they arranged to put a small car next to it, for scale, so that visitors could see the comparison for themselves. The heart came out at about 400 pounds, roughly 180 kilograms. It measured around 5 feet long, 4 feet wide, and 5 feet high. Miller's own reaction, on the record, was that it was quite a bit smaller than they had expected. They had been anticipating something the size of a sedan. Mark Engstrom of the museum put it plainly. It is big, but it is smaller than people have suggested. Not quite as big as a Volkswagen, so there it is. The largest heart in the history of animal life, from the largest animal that has ever existed, and it is roughly the size and weight of an upright piano, which is, I want to be very clear, still absurd. 400 pounds of muscle, a single organ heavier than 2 grown adults. It moves something in the order of 60 gallons of blood with every beat, which is more blood in one contraction than an entire human being contains. But it is not a car. And the people who pulled it out of a whale with their own hands did not describe anything you could crawl through, let alone swim through. That image, which is repeated everywhere, in books and museums, and every list of amazing animal facts ever written, appears to have grown in the telling. Nobody has measured a passage. Somebody said big, and then somebody said very big, and by the time it reached you, it had become a tunnel. Getting the heart out was only the beginning of the problem, and what happened next tells you everything about the scale of this animal. They could not preserve it in North America. There was no facility on the continent big enough. So the heart went into a freezer in Ontario, where it sat for over a year, and then it was thawed, and its vessels were snipped and plugged, and it was pumped full of liquid to push it back into the shape it had held in life. Over 1,000 liters of formaldehyde. Then it was shipped to Germany, to a specialist plastination facility, where the water and fat in the tissue are replaced with plastic. That process took more than a year. Nobody knew how long it would take, because nobody had ever done it, because nobody had ever had a whale heart. In 2017, it went on display in Toronto, in an exhibition called Out of the Depths, standing next to the skeleton of the animal it came from. 3 years, 2 countries, a freezer, 1,000 liters of formaldehyde, and a specialist workshop in Germany, to display one organ. And the organ turned out to be smaller than the myth. Which is the correct ending, I think, because it points at something we keep doing with this animal. We inflate it. We are not satisfied with 190 tons and 30 meters and a heart the size of a piano. We add a car. We add a swimmable artery. The real animal does not need the help. And the real animal was about to be far stranger than the myth. Because 2 years after that heart went on display, somebody in California worked out how to make one beat where they could hear it, and the number they got was 2. 2 beats a minute. That is the heart rate of a diving blue whale, and until the year 2019, nobody on Earth knew it. Not roughly, not approximately. Nobody had ever measured the heartbeat of the largest animal that has ever lived, because nobody had worked out how you would even begin. Think about the problem for a moment. You need an electrocardiogram, which needs contact with skin. The animal is in the open ocean. It is 30 meters long. It is underwater almost all of the time. You cannot restrain it, cannot sedate it, cannot ask it to hold still, and it will not tolerate anything that hurts. You get, at most, a few seconds while it is at the surface breathing. Jeremy Goldbogen at Stanford had been wondering about this for years. He and Paul Ponganis had measured the heart rates of diving emperor penguins a decade earlier, and had been asking ever since whether the same idea could be scaled up to something 1,000 times larger. Goldbogen's own assessment of the odds was that it was a long shot. Everything had to go right at once. Find a blue whale, get the tag onto exactly the right spot, achieve good contact with the skin, have the electronics survive. Any one of those failing, and you have nothing. In Monterey Bay, off California, they found a pod. The tag was bright orange, about the size of a lunchbox, held on by 4 suction cups, with electrodes built into the center of 2 of the suction feet. The whole thing had to be placed by hand, from a boat, using a pole about 20 feet long, on an animal that was going to be at the surface for a matter of seconds. David Cade, a graduate of Goldbogen's lab, made the placement. He got it on the first attempt. The whale was a male, about 15 years old. Over the following hours, the tag slid gradually into the position it needed to be in, near the left flipper, close to the heart, and it began recording. And then, back in the lab, they nearly did not believe it. Goldbogen has said that they had no idea whether it would work, and were skeptical, even when they saw the initial data. It was Ponganis, at Scripps, who went through it with a very keen eye and found the first heartbeats buried in there. What followed, in Goldbogen's telling, was a lot of high fives and victory laps around the lab. Here is what that tag recorded. When the whale dived, its heart slowed. Not gently. It fell to an average of about 4 to 8 beats per minute, and at the deepest part of the dive, it hit 2. Once every 30 seconds, somewhere inside 30 meters of animal, 400 pounds of muscle contracts, moves 60 gallons of blood, and then does nothing for half a minute. Sit with the stillness of that. You are lying down right now, and your heart is going somewhere around 60 times a minute. 60. That whale, at the bottom of its dive, is running at 1/30th of your resting rate, in the cold and the dark, entirely calm. And that number was not what anyone predicted. It was 30 to 50% lower than the models said it should be. The largest animal in the world was going considerably slower than the mathematics had allowed for, which produced an immediate problem. If the heart only beats once every 30 seconds, what is happening to the blood in between? Blood cannot simply stop. Tissue does not tolerate that. The answer they found is one of the most graceful pieces of engineering in any animal. The aortic arch, the great vessel leaving the heart, is elastic. When the heart contracts, that vessel stretches like a balloon, taking the pressure of the whole beat into its own walls. And then, over the long silence that follows, it slowly squeezes back down, pushing the blood onward, while the heart itself does nothing at all. The whale has a second, slower heart made of tubing. The pump beats twice a minute, and the plumbing carries the rest. Then the whale went up for air, and everything reversed. At the surface, breathing, restoring its oxygen, the heart rate climbed to between 25 and 37 beats per minute. Its longest dive on that recording was 16.5 minutes, and it went past 180 meters down, 2 to 37, a 10-fold swing, in one animal, in one dive. Goldbogen described it as more than an order of magnitude. So that is the picture. Down in the dark, almost stopped, at the surface, hammering, and it is beautiful, and it is calming, and it is exactly the sort of fact this channel exists for. But it is not the important part, because when the team looked at the top of that range, at the 37, and worked out what it meant, they found something that has nothing to do with heart rates at all. They found an answer to a question people have been asking since the first blue whale was ever measured. Why is there nothing bigger? Not why is the blue whale the biggest? Why has nothing bigger ever existed, in 4 billion years, anywhere? The heartbeat answered it. 37 beats per minute is the top. Not the top that was recorded, the top that is possible. That is what the Stanford team concluded. And it is the most significant thing to come out of that tag. When the whale surfaced from a deep feeding dive and drove its heart as hard as it could to reload its body with oxygen, it was running at essentially its physiological limit. There was nothing left. That heart cannot beat faster. And once you accept that, a very old question falls open. Why is there nothing bigger? We have been treating the blue whale as the champion, as though it happened to win a competition that could in principle have been won by something larger. But look at the record. 4 billion years of life on this planet. Every conceivable body plan attempted. Oceans full of opportunity for hundreds of millions of years before whales existed at all. Ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, sharks the size of trawlers, and then whales. And in all of it, nothing has ever exceeded this. That is not luck. That is a wall. Here is why the heart is the wall. And it comes down to an unfairness in the arithmetic that no animal has ever escaped. Make an animal twice as long. Its volume, and therefore its mass, goes up 8-fold. 8 times the tissue, 8 times the cells, 8 times the oxygen demand. That is what needs feeding. Now the heart. The heart is a pump, and a pump's output depends on how much it holds and how fast it can empty. The volume of the heart scales with the body, so that grows 8-fold too, which sounds fine, except that a bigger heart is a slower heart. It has further to travel with each contraction, more mass to move, a longer electrical journey across the muscle. Big hearts beat slowly. That is not a design choice, it is physics, and it holds across every mammal, from a shrew at over 1,000 beats a minute to a whale at 2. So as the animal grows, demand climbs relentlessly, and the pump gets larger but also more sluggish, and the two curves lean towards each other until they touch. At 30 meters and 190 tons, they touch. The blue whale is not the largest animal that exists. It is, as far as anyone can tell, the largest animal that can exist. It is not sitting comfortably at the top of the range. It is pressed flat against the ceiling, and the team said as much. Their analysis suggested the heart is already working at its limit in the ordinary course of feeding, not in an emergency, not fleeing a predator, just eating lunch. A blue whale going about a completely normal day is operating at the outer edge of what a heart can do, and any animal larger would have a heart that could not keep up with its own body, which reframes everything you have heard tonight. The size is not a triumph. The size is a tightrope, and there is a second wall, and it was found by the same laboratory in the same year. In 2019, Goldbogen and colleagues published in Science on why whales are big but not bigger, and their answer came from the other direction. It is not just the heart, it is the food. For filter feeders, they found, body size appears to be limited by prey availability. Being enormous works only as long as there are dense enough swarms of krill to fill you. Grow beyond a certain point, and there is no patch of krill in the ocean rich enough to pay for the body you have built. So the blue whale is squeezed from both sides. The heart cannot go faster. The ocean cannot go richer. And between those two limits, there is a very narrow gap, and the blue whale fills it exactly. Remember the phrase from the Gigantism paper, an energetic knife edge. That is not a metaphor about vulnerability in general. It is a precise description of an animal whose maximum heart rate, maximum body size, and the density of krill swarms in a Pliocene ocean all arrived at the same answer and stopped. And here is the thought I would like to leave you with before we go and look at how it feeds, because it is the strangest consequence of everything above. The blue whale is a temporary shape. It only became possible 4.5 million years ago, when the ice made the ocean lumpy. It is only sustainable while those krill swarms hold their density. It sits at the exact intersection of a physiological ceiling it cannot rise above, and a food supply it cannot do without. It has no headroom in any direction. Every other animal has slack. A wolf can be a bit hungry. A sparrow can have a bad week. The blue whale has a heart at maximum, a body at maximum, and a diet that must be delivered in dense clouds or not at all. Which means the most extraordinary animal that has ever lived is also the most finely balanced, and it did not choose that. Physics chose it. Physics said this far and no further. And the blue whale went exactly that far and stopped, and has been holding there for 4.5 million years. And to hold there, every single day, it has to perform the largest single physical action any animal on this planet has ever made. It is called a lunge, which is far too small a word. This is the largest single biomechanical event that occurs anywhere in nature. Not the largest that whales do, the largest that happens at all on this planet, performed hundreds of times a day by an animal whose heart is already at its limit. Let me walk you through one. Start with the equipment, because the mouth of a blue whale is not a mouth in any sense you are familiar with. Along the underside, from the chin all the way back past the flippers, the throat is pleated. Deep parallel grooves running lengthwise down the body, and they are not decoration. They are folded material. The whole floor of the mouth and throat is a sheet of tissue kept packed away in accordion pleats, waiting. And inside the upper jaw, instead of teeth, there are baleen plates, hundreds of them, hanging down like the teeth of a comb, fraying at the inner edge into a dense mat of bristles. They are made of keratin, which is the same material as your fingernails. The largest animal in history strains its food through a curtain of fingernail. Now, the lunge. The whale comes up at a swarm of krill from below and behind, accelerating hard. This part alone is expensive. It is pushing 190 tons to speed through water, which is 800 times denser than air, and every meter of that costs. Then, at the last moment, it opens. The jaw swings down to something close to 90 degrees. And the ocean, which the whale has just spent enormous energy accelerating towards, hits the inside of that open mouth like a wall. The pleats unfold. The entire throat balloons outward and back, ballooning into a shape that does not look like an animal at all, and the whale takes in a volume of water greater than its own body. Read that again. It engulfs more than itself. In one gulp, a 30-meter animal takes aboard more than 30 meters worth of ocean, and for a moment there is more sea inside the whale than there is whale, and it stops dead. That is the cost, and it is the part nobody mentions. The mouthful is a parachute. All that speed the animal paid for is destroyed instantly, absorbed into the water it just caught. Every lunge is an acceleration followed by a full stop, and the whale must pay for both. The Stanford tag caught the moment. At the bottom of a foraging dive, at the lunge, the heart rate jumped to about 2.5 times its minimum. Down there, at 2 beats a minute, almost still, and then a spike, and then back down. Then the mouth closes, the tongue and the pleats contract, and the whale squeezes all of that water out through the baleen. The sea goes. The krill stay, caught on the mat of bristles, and it swallows. Now, that entire sequence, the chase, the engulfment, the stop, the filter, takes under a minute. Then it does it again, and again. Down at depth, on 2 beats a minute, in the cold, on 1 breath. By the way, if you are still awake, subscribing helps these reach the people who need them at 3 in the morning. That is all. Back to the dark. Here is why the lunge is the key to this entire animal, and why I have given it a chapter of its own. Everything you have heard tonight converges here. Remember why whales got big. The ice made the ocean lumpy, so prey came in dense patches, so the animal with the biggest mouth won. This is that mouth. This is the machine the Pliocene built. Remember the heart at its limit. This is what puts it there. Not swimming, not migrating, eating. The blue whale's cardiovascular system is running at maximum because of the physical violence of catching things that weigh a gram. And remember the knife edge. Here is the arithmetic that makes it a knife edge. Each lunge costs an enormous amount of energy, and it is only worth doing if the krill in that patch are thick enough that the mouthful pays for the effort. In thin water, a lunge is a loss. The whale would be spending more than it takes in, and if it kept doing that, it would starve with its mouth full. So the blue whale cannot simply eat less when times are hard. That option is not available. It cannot nibble. It cannot graze. It has exactly one way to feed. It is enormously expensive, and it only works above a certain density of prey. Below that line, the whole animal stops making sense. That is what it means to be built for feasts. You cannot survive on scraps, no matter how many of them there are. Which brings us to the obvious question, and it is one that, unbelievably, nobody had actually answered until 5 years ago. How much does a blue whale eat? Not estimated, not calculated from a carcass in a whaling station a century ago. Measured on living animals in the water. Everyone had a number. The number was wrong. It was wrong by a factor of 3. 16 tons of shrimp in one day. That is the answer. It was published in November of 2021, and it is 3 times what science had believed for the previous century. The person who went looking for it was Matthew Savoca at Stanford's Hopkins Marine Station, and his own reaction to the gap tells you most of what you need to know about how little we understand these animals. He said it was such a basic question that he had assumed it had been figured out 30, 40, 50 years ago. Nobody had ever measured it. Everything we thought we knew about whale appetite came from indirect sources. The contents of stomachs in whaling stations, metabolic calculations, educated guesses scaled up from smaller animals. Nobody had followed a living blue whale around for a day and counted. So Savoca and his colleagues did, and the method is worth describing because it is a small marvel of stitched-together technology. 3 things had to be measured at once. First, when is the whale actually feeding? Tags, suction cupped to the back, recording movement and acceleration in 3 dimensions, and sound, and video when there was enough light. A lunge has a signature. It shows up in the data as a burst of speed, followed by a sudden deceleration, and once you know that shape, you can count them. Second, how big is the mouthful? For that, they used drones, flown by a team from Duke, photographing the animals from directly above to measure their length. Length gives you body size, and body size gives you the volume the mouth can hold. Third, and this is the hard one, how much krill is in that water? For this, they used an echo sounder, which Savoca has described as a fancy fish finder. It fires sound at several frequencies down into the sea and reads what comes back, and from the echoes, you can measure the size and density of a swarm. Put those 3 together, and you have it. Number of lunges, times volume per lunge, times krill per cubic meter. They did this on 321 whales, across 7 species, from the Atlantic to the Pacific to the Southern Ocean, over roughly a decade. And the answer came back at 16 tons of krill a day for an adult blue whale in the eastern North Pacific. Everyone had been wrong, not by a little. Baleen whales across the board eat about 3 times as much as anyone thought. Some of them, on a big day, put away close to 1/3 of their own body weight. 16 tons. Let me make that real, because I do not think the number lands on its own. Krill are small. A large one is about the size of your little finger. They weigh roughly a gram, so 16 tons of krill is something in the order of 16 million individual animals, eaten by one whale between breakfast and bed. 16 million, every day through the feeding season. In calories, that comes to somewhere between 10 and 20 million. A human being needs about 2,000 a day. So a blue whale, in one day, takes in what a person would take in over roughly 15 to 25 years of eating. And it does it a gram at a time. That is the part I keep returning to. There is no shortcut here. There is no single large meal. The largest animal that has ever lived assembles itself entirely out of things the size of a paperclip. 16 million at a time, through a curtain of fingernail, on a heart beating twice a minute, at the absolute limit of what a heart can do. Now, why was everyone so wrong? Partly because of where the old numbers came from. Whaling stations gave you stomach contents, which tells you what was in there at the moment of death, not what passes through in a day. And a whale caught in the morning has a different stomach from a whale caught at dusk. It is a snapshot of a process, mistaken for the process. But mostly it was a failure of imagination. The old figure had baleen whales eating less than 5% of their body weight. That felt sensible. It matched the intuition that big animals are slow and economical. The real figure runs from 5 to 30%, depending on the day and the species. And 30% is not economy, it is an industrial operation. We had a picture of a gentle giant cruising placidly along, taking in the odd mouthful. The reality is an enormous machine running flat out, all season, hauling in 16 million animals a day, because it has to, because the heart is at maximum, because the body is at maximum, because the Ice Age built it that way. And then there is the other end, because 16 tons go in and 16 tons do not stay. Savoca's team, having worked out how much these animals eat, immediately had to work out what happens to all of it, which is how they solved a mystery that had been sitting in the middle of ocean science for 50 years, unanswered and quietly embarrassing. We killed almost all the whales, and then the krill they ate started disappearing too. Remove the predator and the prey should flourish. That is not a theory. That is the most basic rule in ecology, the one every child works out on their own. And in the Southern Ocean in the 20th century, we ran the experiment at a scale nobody would ever be permitted to attempt on purpose. We killed roughly 1 million krill-eating whales. By any sensible reckoning, the krill should have had the greatest century in their history. The animals eating them by the million were gone. The pressure lifted. The sea should have turned red with them. Instead, the krill collapsed. In parts of the Southern Ocean, krill numbers fell by more than 80%. The sailors of the pre-whaling era used to describe surface waters colored red by the sheer density of them, and that ocean does not exist anymore. Take away the thing that eats krill, and you get fewer krill. This is called the krill paradox, and it sat unexplained for decades, because it makes no sense. It is like discovering that a field has less grass in it after you remove the cows. Savoca's team, having finally measured how much whales actually eat, could also work out what that meant for the past. And the number they arrived at is one of the most disorienting figures in this entire video. Before industrial whaling, the baleen whales of the Southern Ocean alone were eating around 430 million tons of krill every year. Now hold that against this. That is more than twice the total amount of krill that exists in those waters today. Not twice what is eaten, twice what is there. The whales of 1 century ago were consuming, annually, double the entire krill biomass of the modern Southern Ocean. The system they lived in was not slightly richer than ours. It was a different planet, and we are living in the wreckage of it and calling it the ocean. So how does eating something make more of it? Iron. Here is the chain, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Everything in the ocean ultimately eats phytoplankton, the microscopic plants at the surface. Phytoplankton need sunlight, which they have, and they need nutrients. And in vast stretches of the Southern Ocean, the one thing they cannot get enough of is iron. Iron is the limiting ingredient. There is light, there is water, there is nitrogen, and there is almost no iron, and so the whole system runs at a fraction of its potential. Krill eat phytoplankton, and in doing so, they concentrate iron into their bodies. A krill swarm is, chemically speaking, a bank of iron. Savoca's collaborator, Viktor Smetacek, has described krill as a gigantic iron reservoir. But krill live and feed deep, and when a krill dies, its body sinks, and the iron in it goes down into the dark and out of the system for good. Down is the wrong direction. Everything the ocean needs is at the surface, and gravity is constantly taking it away, which is where the whale comes in. A blue whale dives, eats 16 tons of iron-rich krill in the deep, and then comes up. And at the surface, it defecates, enormous plumes of it, floating, buoyant, loaded with the iron it just collected from below. And the phytoplankton bloom. That is the whole mechanism. The whale is an elevator. It goes down, collects the iron that was on its way to being lost forever, and brings it back to the sunlight where it can be used again. Smetacek's description of the relationship is that the blue whales and the krill support each other, and they need each other. The predator was farming its own prey. Not deliberately, not cleverly. Just by being large and eating deep and surfacing to breathe. So when the whaling fleets removed 1 million whales from that ocean, they did not release the krill from pressure. They switched off the fertilizer. The iron kept falling and stopped coming back. The phytoplankton thinned. The krill that fed on them thinned. And the ocean, quietly, over decades, became poorer, and nobody understood why until somebody thought to measure whale droppings. Even now, with the populations as reduced as they are, the researchers estimate that whales are still keeping around 1,200 tons of iron a year from being lost to the deep. That is what is left of the machine. And there is a hopeful line in this, and I want to give it to you properly, because it is the one genuinely optimistic fact in this video. If the whales come back, the krill come back. The authors of that study put it in the careful language of science, saying that the recovery of baleen whales and their nutrient recycling could increase productivity and restore ecosystem function lost during 20th century whaling. In plain English, the damage is not permanent. The engine is not broken. It is just missing most of its parts, and the parts are alive, and they breed. Which is a strange thing to find at the bottom of this chapter, given how it started. We removed the predators, and the prey died with them, because the largest animal on Earth turned out to be the thing that was holding the whole ocean up. And it does all of that in silence. Except it does not, of course. It is making more noise than almost anything alive. You just cannot hear it. The blue whale is the loudest animal on Earth, and you would not hear it if you were floating directly above one. Its calls reach around 188 decibels. That is the number everyone quotes, and it gets compared to a jet engine. And I want to deal with that comparison honestly before we go any further, because it is not quite fair. Underwater sound is measured against a different reference pressure than sound in air. So an underwater decibel and an airborne decibel are not the same unit wearing the same name. Putting 188 next to a jet engine's number is comparing two things measured on two different rulers. The whale is astonishingly loud. It is not, in any meaningful sense, standing on a runway. The truly strange thing about the voice is not the volume anyway. It is the pitch. Blue whales call somewhere between about 10 and 40 hertz. Fin whales sit around 20, and human hearing gives out at about 20 hertz at the bottom end, on a good day, in a young person, in a quiet room. So most of what a blue whale says is below you, not faint, not distant, below, underneath the floor of what your ears are built to register. If you were in the water beside one while it called, you would not hear a great mournful song. You would feel something in your chest, a pressure, a low unease, the sense that a lorry had just gone past somewhere. That is the largest animal in history speaking, and your body registers it as weather. And that is on purpose, or at least it is why it works. Low sounds carry, high sounds do not. High frequencies have short wavelengths, and short wavelengths get scattered and absorbed by everything they meet. Bubbles, plankton, temperature layers, the surface, the sand. They exhaust themselves quickly. Low frequencies have long, slow, lazy wavelengths that ignore all of it. They pass through. They do not care about the plankton. They keep going. Then add water. Sound moves through the sea at around 1,500 meters per second, which is more than 4 times its speed in air. And it does so with far less loss. The ocean is a vastly better medium for sound than the atmosphere will ever be, which is why whales use it and birds do not. And then there is the last part, which turns a loud animal into a planetary one. The ocean has a channel in it. At a certain depth, roughly a kilometer down in much of the world, there is a layer where the speed of sound reaches a minimum because the pressure is pushing it one way and the temperature is pulling it the other. And a sound wave that enters that layer cannot easily leave. If it starts to rise, it bends back down. If it starts to sink, it bends back up. It is trapped, refracted endlessly into the middle of its own corridor, and it travels along it with almost nothing to slow it down. It is a pipe, an invisible acoustic pipe running through the deep ocean all the way around the world. The navies of the world found this in the middle of the last century and immediately understood what it was worth, and we will come to what they built with it, because it matters enormously to this story. But the whales found it first, by several million years. A blue whale calling into that channel is not shouting across a room. It is putting a signal into a system that carries it for hundreds of kilometers, and by some estimates, a great deal further. 2 animals that cannot see each other, that are not in the same weather, that are not in the same country, can be in contact, which changes what the animal is. We have spent this whole video treating the blue whale as solitary. You find one, sometimes 2, never a crowd. And that is true of what you can see. But the visual picture is the wrong picture. It is the picture you get from a boat, which is a machine for looking at the top 2 meters of the ocean. Down in the sound channel, an animal alone in 1,000 kilometers of empty water may not be alone at all. It may be in the middle of a conversation that has been going on for days, with a whale it has never met, somewhere over the curve of the planet. The loneliness we project onto them may simply be a reporting error. We are visual animals describing an acoustic one and concluding it has no friends because we cannot see them. And it is the males who sing. The long, patterned, repeated sequences, the actual songs rather than simple calls, come from males. Nobody is entirely sure what for. To attract females, probably. To signal to other males, possibly. Both, most likely. And the honest answer is that we are guessing, because we have never watched a blue whale do anything about it afterwards. So that is the voice. Below your hearing. Above almost any volume in nature, sent down a pipe in the ocean that reaches across an ocean basin, by an animal we thought was alone, because we could not see the other end of the line. And every one of those voices is getting deeper. All of them, everywhere, every population, in every ocean, at the same time, for the last 60 years. Nobody has any idea why. Every blue whale on the planet is singing lower than its grandparents did, and this is the single strangest unsolved problem in the study of these animals. It was found by accident, which is how the good ones usually arrive. Mark McDonald runs an ocean acoustics consultancy in Colorado. He was looking at blue whale recordings, and he noticed that his equipment seemed to need adjusting. The songs were not sitting where they used to sit. The frequencies had moved. He took it to John Hildebrand at the Scripps Institution of Oceanography in San Diego, who runs the Whale Acoustics Laboratory there, and Hildebrand's reaction, in his own words, was that this is weird. So they went looking for old recordings, really old ones, and eventually they found them. Some of the earliest recordings of blue whales ever made, produced by the United States Navy in the 1960s, sitting on analog cassette tape. They compared them. The frequencies had fallen by about 30% in 40 years. Hildebrand's description of seeing that number was that you could really see it, that the thing had shifted a lot. 30% is not a subtle trend that you have to squint at. In musical terms, the entire species has come down by several notes. The obvious next thought is that this is a local quirk. One population, one ocean, one weird decade. So they checked the Antarctic, where the blue whales sing a different song, down. They checked the Central Pacific, where they sing another different song, down. Every population, every ocean, every song they had data for. All of them syncing, all of them at once, all of them following the same downward curve, and none of them in contact with each other. MacDonald, Hildebrand, and Sarah Mesnick published it formally in 2009 in the journal Endangered Species Research. In the paper, they laid out the possible explanations, and then they knocked each one down. Was it ocean acidification, changing how sound travels? The numbers do not work. Was it noise pollution, whales lowering their voices to escape a busier sea? That is backwards. If the ocean is noisier, you get louder, not lower. Was it body size? Bigger animals make deeper sounds, and whaling removed the largest whales. So as the population recovers, the average whale should be getting bigger, and therefore deeper. That is a good idea. It is the best one anyone had. But the rates of decline do not correlate with population growth from one part of the world to another, which they would have to if size were driving it. Was it a recovering population? Hildebrand's own hypothesis is the most interesting version of this. When numbers were desperately low in the 1960s, a male looking for a female had to reach as far as possible, and a higher note carries more energy and can be pushed louder. So the males may have been shouting high to cover an empty ocean. As numbers recovered, the argument goes, there was less need for that, and they could sing lower and more comfortably. Hildebrand describes it like an opera singer, seeing how long he can hold a note, using nearly all the air in his lungs. It is a lovely idea, and it does not fully fit either, because the shift was linear and constant across every group worldwide, and the recovery rates were not. Hildebrand's summary of the situation is the most honest sentence in this entire video. He said it is just kind of tormenting all the whale scientists that they cannot figure it out. That was 2009. So what happened next? In 2022, a team published an update in PLOS One, looking at data from the Southern California Bight from 2006 to 2019. Blue whales in that population make 2 units of song, called A and B, and the earlier work had only tracked the B call. This study tracked both. Both are still falling. The rate has become gentler, somewhere between about 0.1% and 1% a year, and it seems to have steadied somewhat after the year 2000. The same downward shift has since been documented in other baleen whales too, which makes it bigger than blue whales, and makes it worse. And their conclusion, 13 years after MacDonald first noticed his equipment looked wrong, was this: no current theory adequately accounts for all aspects of the phenomenon. That is where it stands tonight. The largest animal that has ever lived is changing its voice, slowly, steadily, in the same direction, in every ocean on Earth, in populations separated by entire hemispheres that have never heard each other and have no way to coordinate. It has been doing it for at least 60 years, and it has not stopped. And after 2 decades of extremely good scientists throwing every idea they have at it, nobody knows why. I find this oddly comforting at this hour, and I hope you will too. We can measure the heartbeat of a whale from a boat. We can count 16 million shrimp in a stomach we never opened. We can read a whale's entire life out of its earwax, which we will get to shortly. And we cannot answer why they are singing lower. The animal is changing in front of us, on the record, in data, and it will not explain itself. There is one voice, though, that never fit the pattern at all. One animal, in the North Pacific, singing at entirely the wrong frequency. In 1989, biologists at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution heard something in the North Pacific that had no business being there. It had every feature of a whale call. Low, repetitive, patterned, structured. It behaved like a whale. It moved like a whale. It was at 52 hertz. Blue whales call between about 10 and 39. Fin whales sit around 20. 52 is not slightly off. It is more than twice as high as the animals it appeared to be traveling among. It was a voice in a register that nothing in that ocean uses. They recorded it again in 1990 and again in 1991. And then the Cold War ended, and this story became possible. For decades, the United States Navy had been running something called SOSUS, the Sound Surveillance System. Hydrophones on the sea floor, wired back to shore stations, listening for Soviet submarines. It was built on the acoustic channel we talked about earlier, the pipe running through the deep ocean. Because if you can hear a whale across an ocean basin, you can hear a submarine. When the Soviet Union dissolved, parts of that network were declassified and opened for oceanographic research. And a team at Woods Hole, William Watkins, Marianne Daher, Joseph George, and David Rodriguez, pointed the world's largest submarine detection system at one whale. They tracked it for 12 years. Here is what that looks like, and it is one of the strangest data sets in biology. Every year, between August and December, the call would appear. They would follow it night and day as it moved through the North Pacific, and then, always within a few weeks in January or early February, it would go out of range and they would lose it until the next season. It moved between about 31 and 69 kilometers a day. In one season, they tracked it over 708 kilometers. In the season of 2002 to 2003, they followed it for 11,062 kilometers. 11,000 kilometers, following one animal by sound that nobody has ever seen. The team noted, almost in passing, that the usual tracking of an individual whale lasts hours at best. They never saw it. In more than 3 decades, nobody has. There is no photograph, no tissue sample, no tag, no sighting. There is only the voice, arriving every autumn, moving between California and the Aleutians, in a pattern that matches the migrations of blue whales and fin whales. The press called it the loneliest whale in the world, and that name has stuck to it for 30 years. And I have to be careful here, because that is where the facts end and the story begins. Nothing about that call establishes loneliness. Watkins and his colleagues did not claim it. They said, carefully, that the animal might have a malformation, or might be a hybrid of 2 species, and that whatever the cause, it had given them an unusual opportunity to document the seasonal activities of what they believed to be one individual whale. That is the actual scientific position, and it contains no sadness at all. Nobody has shown that other whales cannot hear 52 hertz. Nobody has shown that it never gets an answer. The popular version has it deaf, which the recordings do not demonstrate. The popular version has it isolated, which nobody has observed, because nobody has observed anything about it except its voice. What we do know is this. The leading explanation is that it is a hybrid, most likely of a blue whale and a fin whale. That is not fantasy. Blue and fin whales do interbreed. Hybrids exist. Some of them are fertile, and hybrid ancestry turns up across ocean basins. A mixed vocal anatomy could plausibly produce a mixed voice. But without a body or a sample, hybrid stays a hypothesis, and an honest scientist will tell you so. And there is one detail in the record that quietly ruins the myth and improves the animal. Over the years, its call has come down, from near 52 hertz into the high 40s. You know why that matters. That is the same shift happening to every blue whale on the planet. The deepening. the unexplained global slide. So whatever this animal is, it is not outside the system. It is not a broken thing singing to nobody. It is doing exactly what its relatives are doing, in exactly the same direction, on exactly the same schedule. It just started from somewhere else, and it has been doing it for over 30 years, arriving every August, crossing thousands of kilometers, in perfect health as far as anybody can tell, because a sick animal does not do that for 3 decades. So here is what I would like you to take to sleep instead of the sad version. There is an animal in the North Pacific that nobody has ever seen. It has been singing since before some of you were born. Every autumn it comes back, and a room full of hydrophones built to find submarines picks up the voice and follows it across half an ocean. And then, in January, it goes somewhere we cannot follow, and every August it returns. It is not lonely, it is unobserved. Those are very different things, and we should be careful not to give an animal our own feelings simply because we cannot see it. And speaking of things nobody sees, there is one part of a blue whale's life that has never been witnessed at all, and it involves the fastest growth of any animal on Earth. 100 kilograms a day. That is what a blue whale calf can put on, late in nursing. Not in a good month, in a day. It is gaining the weight of a fully grown man every 24 hours on nothing but milk in the open ocean while swimming. Let me start it properly. A blue whale is born at around 7 meters long and 2.5 tons. 7 meters, that is the newborn. It arrives in the world already larger than almost any land animal will ever be, longer than a family car, heavier than an adult hippo, and it is a baby. It cannot feed itself. It cannot navigate. It has never taken a breath. And that first breath has to happen immediately, because it has been born into water, and it is a mammal. And a mammal that does not surface in the first moments does not have a second chance. So the mother pushes it up. That is the first act of a blue whale's life, and it is the same as the first act of yours, except that someone had to lift 2.5 tons to the surface to make it happen. Then the feeding begins, and the numbers stop being sensible. Whale milk is not like ours. It is closer to a paste, enormously rich, enormously fatty, because the calf is not being nourished so much as constructed, and there is a deadline. The calf does not suckle in the way you are imagining either. In the water, that does not work. There is nothing to seal against, and the milk would be lost to the ocean instantly. So the mother contracts the muscles around her mammary glands and injects it, and the calf takes it in enormous volumes, and the whole transaction is fast, because both of them need to breathe. And on that, the calf grows by up to 100 kilograms a day. Take a moment with the physics of that. Every 24 hours, the animal is assembling roughly 100 kilograms of new bone, muscle, blubber, blood, and nerve. That is not eating, that is manufacturing. It is producing a substantial mammal's worth of new body every single day, out of a liquid, and it does not stop, and it does not slow down, and the mother is paying for all of it out of her own body. That is the part that undoes me. She is not eating, not properly. The breeding grounds are not the feeding grounds. The krill is somewhere else, back in the cold water, hundreds or thousands of kilometers away. So the mother is running the largest milk operation on the planet out of reserves she built up in a previous season, and she is losing weight, catastrophically, every day, to build the calf. The largest animal on Earth is fasting so that a slightly smaller one can double. And remember the arithmetic from earlier. This is an animal whose heart is at its physiological limit, that must feed on dense patches or not at all, that lives on an energetic knife edge. Now put a calf on it. Now make it produce 100 kilograms a day of another creature. The margins on this animal are not slim. There are no margins. The calf grows for months like this, and by the time it stops nursing, it has more or less doubled its birth length and is an enormous animal in its own right, And then it has to learn how to be a blue whale in an ocean where the food is in a handful of places thousands of kilometers apart, and nobody is going to explain any of it. Except somebody is. Because this is where the migration comes from, and I think this is the quiet heart of the whole species. That calf does not work out where the krill is. It could not. There is no map, no landmarks, no reason on earth that a young animal in a featureless ocean should know that if you swim for 6 weeks in that direction, there will be a bloom of shrimp waiting. It knows because its mother took it there. That is the entire mechanism. A blue whale learns the ocean the way a child learns a route to school, by being walked along it. The feeding grounds are not instinct. They are a place your mother showed you, once when you were young, and then you go back every year for 80 or 90 years, because that is where the food was when you were a baby. The knowledge is not written in the genome. It is handed over, one animal to one animal, in a single season. Hold on to that. Do not let it go. Because in about 5 chapters, it is going to become the saddest fact in this entire video, and I need you to have it already in your hands when it arrives. For now though, just the calf. 7 meters at birth, 100 kilograms a day, a mother starving in warm water to build it. The two of them moving together, breathing together, and then setting off across an ocean towards a place the calf has no reason to believe in, and nobody has ever seen it happen. Nobody has watched a blue whale being born. Nobody knows, for the southern populations, where they even go to do it. We know the number is 100 kilograms a day. We do not know the room. Blue whales never clean their ears. That is the whole fact, and everything in this chapter comes out of it. There is no mechanism for it. Wax is produced in the ear canal, and it stays, layer over layer, for the animal's entire life, for 80 or 90 years, until it forms a solid plug of compacted wax that can run 25 centimeters long, 10 inches of earwax, which sounds like a joke and is instead the most remarkable biological document on this planet, because it does not build up evenly. It builds up in bands, light and dark, alternating at roughly 6-month intervals for the whole of the animal's life. The light layers correspond to periods of feeding. The dark layers correspond to fasting and migration. Every summer of eating and every winter of hunger is written into the ear as a stripe, the way a tree writes its years into its trunk. Whalers and biologists worked out decades ago that you could count those layers to age a whale. That was the extent of it, a ruler and a number. Then, in 2007, a blue whale washed up near Santa Barbara in California, killed by a ship strike. A male, about 21 meters long, roughly 12 years old. The Santa Barbara Museum of Natural History dissected it, took the earplug out, and put it away, and it sat in a freezer. Meanwhile, 2 researchers at Baylor University in Texas, Stephen Trumbull and Sasha Yusenko, had been measuring pollutants in whale blubber, and they had a thought. The chemicals they were tracking dissolve in fat. Earwax is fat. If the wax builds in dated layers, and the chemicals in the blood get deposited into the wax as it forms, then the plug is not a ruler. It is a diary. Yusenko has described the moment as an actual aha. They contacted the museum. The plug came out of the freezer. They cut it in half lengthwise, and they analyzed each layer separately, and what came out is, as far as anyone can tell, unique in biology. A month-by-month chemical record of one animal's entire existence, from birth to death, at 6-month resolution. Their results went into the proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences in 2013. Here is what a whale's life looks like when you read it. The testosterone rises through the first 3 years. Then it falls, and stays low until the animal is about 9. Then it detonates. At around 10 years old, it goes up by something like 200 times. And that is puberty, visible in wax, on a specific date. That single line settled an argument. Estimates of when blue whales reach sexual maturity had ranged from 5 to 15 years. depending on whether you were measuring body length, or ovaries, or blubber. The earplug simply says 10 and shows it's working. The cortisol, the stress hormone, climbs across the whole life, roughly doubling over baseline, and it spikes hardest at that same moment, around sexual maturity, which the researchers suggest might be competition, or the strain of a new social world opening up. And then the contaminants, pesticides, flame retardants, industrial compounds, mercury, all of them present, all of them dated, and they are at their highest in the very first layers. The first 6 months of life, which means the whale did not collect them. It was born with them. They came from its mother, transferred across the placenta, and then through the milk. Every blue whale calf begins its life being handed a chemical inheritance built up over the decades before it existed. The mother offloads a portion of her lifetime's contamination into her first calf, and the calf carries it forever, and it is all there in the wax, in the first 2 stripes. And there is one detail that I cannot let go of. Among those chemicals was DDT. DDT was banned about 30 years before that whale was born. It should not have been in that animal at all. It was in every layer of its life, birth to death. And Yusenko made exactly that point, banned 30 years before this animal was born, and it was exposed to it over its entire lifetime, alongside the modern chemicals as well. The ocean does not forget. It just takes longer to say so. So that is what came out of a lump of wax in a freezer. The age of puberty, a lifetime of stress, a record of every poison the 20th century put in the water. From an animal that nobody studied, that nobody could follow, that was killed by a ship and would otherwise have simply sunk and been forgotten. There is no other animal on Earth we can do this to, not one. Trumbull's own line is that they were the first group to realize the earplug contained more than an age, and that they could create a chemical portrait of the whale's life, a portrait of a specific individual, assembled after its death from the contents of its ear. And here is where it becomes something much larger than one whale. Because museums have been collecting these plugs for over a century. The Smithsonian has hundreds of them. So does the Natural History Museum in London. They came out of whaling stations, they were catalogued, they were labelled, and then they sat in drawers for decades because nobody could think of anything to do with them except count the stripes. Every one of them is a diary, and some of them are very old. In November of 2018, the same team opened the drawers. They took 20 earplugs from 3 species, fin whales, humpbacks, and blue whales, out of the Smithsonian in Washington, the Natural History Museum in London, and some recent strandings. Pacific and Atlantic. They read the cortisol out of every layer of every one of them, 1,084 layers in total, and stitched the results together into a single continuous record. It runs from about 1870 to 2016. 146 years of the stress hormones of great whales, published in Nature Communications. Trumbull's own summary was that this was the first study ever to quantify stress patterns in baleen whales over time. Now, they had a line on a graph representing whale stress across a century and a half, and they had another number that anyone can look up, which is how many whales the world killed each year. They put the 2 lines next to each other. They match. The cortisol in the wax rises and falls with the whaling. Not roughly, not in spirit. It tracks it. When the hunting intensified, the stress hormones of the whales that were not killed went up. When it eased, they came down. And the peak is where you would expect it, and it is worse than you would expect it. The 1960s. The height of industrial whaling, around 150,000 whales taken in a year. And in that decade, the cortisol reaches its maximum, the highest average of the entire 20th century, recorded in the ears of the animals that got away. Sit with what that actually means, because it is not a metaphor. The whales that survived the whaling era were not fine. We have their blood chemistry. They were living in a state of measurable, sustained physiological stress. And we can read it, decades later, out of a lump of wax in a museum drawer in London. Trumbull has a term for it: survivor stress. His point is that whaling is not only the animals that were killed, it is everything around it. The ships, the noise, the engines, the proximity, the constant harassment of an ocean full of vessels hunting your species. That reaches animals that were never touched, spread across vast distances, and it stays in their bodies, and it goes into their ears. And then there is the detail that makes the whole study extraordinary, and it is the one that convinced me this is real, rather than a coincidence of two lines on a chart. The Second World War. During those years, whaling collapsed. The fleets had other work. The factory ships were requisitioned or sunk. The number of whales killed fell dramatically, and by the logic of the argument, the stress should have fallen with it. It went up. The cortisol rose during the war, while the hunting was at its lowest, and the explanation Trumbull and Yusenko offer is straightforward and awful. The whaling stopped, but the ocean did not go quiet. It filled with warships, sonar, depth charges, convoys, engines, torpedoes, an entire planet's navies operating at once in the same water. The whales were not being hunted. They were simply living in the middle of a world war, and their ears recorded it. That is what is in those drawers. Somewhere in the Natural History Museum in London, there is a plug of wax pulled from a whale's head a century ago, and inside it, in a band about the width of a fingernail, is the year 1943. Not as history, as chemistry. As the actual physiological state of an actual animal that was swimming through it while it happened, and had no idea what it was, and could not have known what any of it was for. They also found that stress correlates with sea surface temperature anomalies in recent decades, which is the modern chapter of the same story, and is still being written into wax right now, in whales that are alive tonight. So let me say the thing this study forces us to say. We have spent this entire video marveling at these animals. The heart, at 2 beats a minute, 16 million shrimp a day, a voice in a pipe across the ocean, the unexplained deepening of the song, the calf gaining 100 kilograms a day while its mother starves. And underneath all of it, the whole time, in every one of those animals, there has been a slow accumulation of evidence about us. They were not just living through the 20th century, they were recording it. The DDT we banned, the war we fought, the fleets we sent, all of it deposited, 6 months at a time, in the ears of animals that were doing nothing except trying to eat krill and find each other in the dark. We did not know we were being written down, and the numbers behind that graph, the whaling counts that the cortisol tracks so precisely, are the part of this story I have been putting off. So let us do them now, plainly, once, and then we will get to what happened afterwards. Over 300,000 blue whales were killed in the southern hemisphere, around 20,000 more in the North Atlantic and the North Pacific combined. Those are the International Whaling Commission's own figures, and I am going to give you the rest of them plainly, without decoration, because this material does not need any help from me. Nearly 30,000 blue whales were killed in the single season of 1930 to 1931. One season, 30,000 of the largest animals that have ever existed in a matter of months. The Antarctic population, the largest of them, the true giants, was reduced to 0.15% of what it had been before, which is a percentage, and percentages are slippery at this hour, so here it is the other way. For every Antarctic blue whale that survived, roughly 666 were killed, 666 to 1. Now let me explain why it happened, because the reason is not what people assume, and it is the only part of this that is genuinely interesting, rather than simply grim. Blue whales were not hunted for meat, primarily. They were hunted for oil. The blubber renders into an oil that was, for a long time, one of the most useful industrial substances on Earth. It lit lamps. It lubricated machinery. It was processed into soap and later into margarine. There is a real sense in which the 19th and early 20th centuries were built on rendered whale, and blue whales, being the largest, gave the most per animal by an enormous margin. But for most of history, they were also completely safe, and this is the part that matters. A blue whale is too fast to chase with oars. It is too strong to hold with a hand-thrown harpoon, and when you kill it, it sinks, because unlike a right whale, it does not float. So for centuries, the blue whale was the one animal in the ocean that whalers could see and could not have. They watched them go past, and they could do nothing at all. 3 inventions ended that. The steam engine, which meant a boat could finally outrun one. The explosive harpoon, fired from a cannon in the bow, which meant one shot could kill something weighing 190 tons. And the compressor, which meant you could pump the carcass full of air so that it would float instead of sinking. Put those 3 together, and the blue whale went from untouchable to inevitable in about a generation. Nothing about the animal changed. It had no defense, because it had never needed one, and it had no time to develop one, because the whole thing was over in decades. Then came the factory ship, which removed the last constraint. Before them, you had to bring the whale back to a shore station, which limited how far you could go. A factory ship processes the animal at sea, on a slipway at the stern, which means the fleet never has to come home. The Antarctic, which is the richest krill water on the planet, and therefore the place the blue whales all had to be, was suddenly available. 30,000 in one season is what that looks like. The International Whaling Commission protected blue whales in 1966, and I want to be honest about that date, because it is often presented as the happy ending, and it was not. Illegal hunting continued afterwards. The Soviet Union kept killing protected whales into the 1970s and falsified its returns to the Commission, so the real figures for that period were not known for decades. The protection was real, but it arrived after the animals were essentially gone, and it did not immediately stop. So that is the century. An animal that had been perfectly safe for its entire existence, that had never in 4.5 million years needed to be afraid of anything, met steam power and an explosive harpoon, and was reduced by 99.85% in the space of about 60 years. And here is the thing I keep coming back to. Everything we have talked about tonight, we learned afterwards. We did not know the heart rate. We did not know what they ate. Not really. Not until 2021. We had never preserved a heart. We did not know they were holding the krill up, or fertilizing the phytoplankton, or that removing them would empty the ocean they lived in. We did not know the songs would deepen. We did not know that the survivors' ears were filling up with cortisol while it happened. We took 99.85% of them before we understood a single thing about them that is not a moral failing peculiar to whalers. Nobody had the tools. The tag that measured the heartbeat did not exist. The echo sounder that counted the krill did not exist. It is simply what happened. We finished with this animal before we started on it. And there is one place on Earth where you can see exactly what that cost. Because in that particular corner of the ocean, the blue whales did not come back after 1966. They did not come back for 50 years. And when the researchers finally worked out why, the answer had nothing to do with krill, or with hunting, or with anything you could put on a graph. It had to do with the calf and what its mother shows it. South Georgia is a curve of rock and ice in the South Atlantic, about 170 kilometers long, with mountains coming straight out of the sea and no permanent population to speak of. It is also one of the great feeding grounds on Earth. The water around it is thick with krill. Everything down there wants to be near South Georgia, and for as long as there have been blue whales went there to eat, which is why, in 1904, the whaling started there. Over the following 60 years, Something like 176,000 whales of all species were killed in those waters. More than 42,000 of them were blue whales. At the peak, around 3,000 blue whales a year were being taken from this one island's coastline. Then it stopped. The stations closed. The whalers left. And the buildings rusted where they stood. And South Georgia went quiet. And the blue whales did not come back. Not in the 1970s. Not in the 80s. Not in the 90s. The International Whaling Commission had protected them in 1966. The killing had stopped, and around the wider Southern Ocean, the population was creeping upward, slowly, from almost nothing. But not there. Between 1997 and 2017, researchers ran visual and acoustic surveys around South Georgia. 20 years of looking and listening in the middle of one of the richest krill grounds on the planet. They found 0 blue whales, or perhaps 1, or perhaps 2, 20 years, and the krill had not gone anywhere. That is the crucial part. The food was still there, in enormous quantity, in exactly the place it had always been, doing exactly what it had always done. The larder was full and open, and nobody came. So why? The explanation the researchers offered is the reason I asked you to hold on to that fact about the calf 4 chapters ago. A blue whale does not know where the food is. It cannot. There is no map in the genome that says South Georgia. The ocean has no landmarks, and the krill blooms are seasonal and specific and separated by thousands of kilometers of nothing at all. It knows because its mother took it there when it was small. That is the entire mechanism. It is not instinct. It is a route, walked once, in the company of a parent, and then repeated for the next 80 years. Now consider what 42,000 dead blue whales means at a place like that. It does not only mean 42,000 animals. It means that almost every single whale that knew South Georgia was a feeding ground was killed at South Georgia. The knowledge and the animals were the same thing, and they were in the same place, and the whaling fleet took them together. The researchers put it in the careful language of their profession. They described it as a possible loss of cultural knowledge of the habitat as a feeding area. Cultural knowledge in a whale. That is not sentiment. It is precisely what was lost. Not the krill, not the water, not the ability to swim there. The fact that anyone knew to go. South Georgia did not become uninhabitable. It became forgotten. And I want to sit with that for a moment, because it is a genuinely new kind of loss, and I do not think we have language for it. We are used to extinction, and we are used to habitat destruction, and this is neither. The place is fine. The animals exist, and for 50 years they simply did not know that a feast was sitting there, because every individual who could have shown them was dead. There is a second possibility the researchers raise, and it is worse in a different way. Perhaps the knowledge did not vanish. Perhaps it changed. Perhaps the whales that survived learned something about that stretch of coast and passed on something rather different, and the young ones learned to stay away. Nobody knows which of those it is, possibly both, but either way, the shape is the same. For 50 years, in the middle of the best krill in the Southern Ocean, there were no blue whales, and it was not because we had made the water unlivable. It was because we had removed everyone who remembered. And now think about what that does to everything else we have discussed tonight. We talked about the krill paradox, about how the whales fertilize the water that grows the krill that feeds the whales. That system needs the whales to be present, not to exist somewhere, to be there, at the surface, in that water, on that day. An empty South Georgia is not a neutral South Georgia. It is a place where the iron has been falling into the deep for 50 years with nothing to bring it back. So that is where this leaves us. The killing stopped in the 60s. The animals were protected, and the recovery did not happen in one of the most important places on Earth for half a century, because recovery is not just arithmetic. Numbers are not enough. Somebody has to know the way, which is why, in 2020, a research vessel went back to South Georgia to count. Nobody was expecting much. 20 years of surveys had produced almost nothing. They found 55 Antarctic blue whales at South Georgia in one expedition. The team was from the British Antarctic Survey. 20 years of surveys before them had turned up 0, or 1, or perhaps 2, and now they were counting 55. Their whale ecologist, Jennifer Jackson, described it as unprecedented. After 3 years of surveys, she said, they were thrilled to see so many whales visiting South Georgia to feed again. Something had changed, and nothing about the arithmetic explains it, because the Southern Ocean population had been recovering slowly for decades, and none of that recovery had ever produced a single whale at this island. So what happened? Somebody found it. That is the only explanation on offer, and it is a lovely one. Some whale, at some point, for reasons nobody will ever know, went to South Georgia and discovered that the water was full of krill. Perhaps a wanderer, perhaps a young animal that got lost, perhaps one that followed a hunch, if a whale can be said to have one. And then it came back, and then it brought a calf, and the calf learned the route the way calves do, and it brought its own calf, and slowly, over some number of years that nobody was watching, the knowledge began to be rebuilt from scratch. The researchers describe it as a rediscovery of an oceanic larder by new generations of whales. Rediscovery, not recovery. Nobody remembered South Georgia. It had to be found again, the way you would find a place you had never heard of, by going there. And over the past 9 years, 41 new individual blue whales have been catalogued in those waters. Individuals, not estimates. 41 specific animals, identified by the pattern of pale mottling on their flanks, photographed and matched against the catalogue, the way we talked about right at the start of this video. Every one of them is somebody who now knows the way. Some populations are now growing at up to 7% a year. 7% compounding in an animal that takes 10 years to reach maturity and produces one calf at a time. That is about as fast as this species can physically go. It is the maximum speed of a blue whale recovery, and it is happening. Now let me be honest with you, because it is very late and you deserve the truth rather than a nice ending. 55 is not a lot of whales. Before the whaling, there was something like 250,000 blue whales in the Southern Ocean. By 1998, they had come back to roughly 1% of that. The Antarctic blue whale is still listed as critically endangered. The species overall is endangered. There are perhaps somewhere in the region of 10 to 25,000 of them left on the whole planet, which is a rounding error on a species. And they are still being killed, not hunted, but hit. Ship strikes are one of the leading causes of blue whale death today. The whale that gave us the earplug, the one whose entire life we read out of 10 inches of wax, died because a vessel ran into it near Santa Barbara. The 9 whales trapped in the ice off Newfoundland, one of whom gave us the only preserved heart in existence, took 3% of an entire regional population with them in a single event, which tells you exactly how thin the numbers are. Shipping is getting busier. South Georgia now has a seasonal krill fishery, in the same water, on the same food. So it is not a triumph, it is a beginning, and beginnings are fragile. But here is why I wanted to end this part of the story here, rather than back in the 1960s. The blue whales are not coming back because we saved them. We stopped killing them, which is the least you can do, and it is not nothing, but nobody rebuilt anything. Nobody could. There is no way to teach a whale where the krill is. There is no reintroduction program for an animal that lives in the middle of the South Atlantic and cannot be captured, held, moved, or trained. Everything that has happened at South Georgia since the year 2000 has been done by the whales themselves. They found it. They remembered it. They taught it to their children. A knowledge that took half a century to be erased is being reassembled, one animal at a time, by animals we cannot help and cannot follow, in water we have barely surveyed, using a method we do not fully understand. And there is one more piece of that which I love. The krill will come back too, if enough of them return. That was the finding from the feeding study. Recovering whales bring the iron up, the phytoplankton bloom, and the productivity that was lost in the 20th century can be restored. The system heals itself, from the top down, if the top is present. So 55 whales at South Georgia is not 55 whales. It is 55 elevators, back at work, in an ocean that has been slowly draining of iron since 1904. Which leaves only one thing left to say tonight, and it is the largest gap of all. For all of this, for the heartbeat and the wax and the krill and the songs, there is something fundamental about this animal we still do not know. We do not know where they come from. Nobody has ever seen two blue whales mate. Not once, not on film, not from a boat, not by accident. In the entire history of a species that has been hunted, studied, photographed, tagged, tracked by military hydrophones and pulled apart on beaches, no human being has ever witnessed the largest animal on Earth reproduce. Nobody has ever seen one born either. And for the whole southern hemisphere, we do not know where they go to do it. The breeding grounds are thought to lie somewhere in the deep tropical water of the South Pacific, or the South Atlantic, or the Indian Ocean. And if that sounds like an answer, look at it again. That is 3 oceans. That is half the surface of the planet. Somewhere out there, every year, the largest animals in the history of life gather to make more of themselves. And we cannot find the room. We have mapped Mars. We have photographed the surface of a comet. We do not know where blue whales have their babies. Let me put the rest of the gaps beside it, because they are stranger than they look. The first blue whale heart that was ever preserved went on display in 2017. Before that, not one. In the whole history of anatomy, the first time the heartbeat was measured was 2019. One whale, one tag, one afternoon in Monterey Bay. The first proper measurement of what they eat came in 2021, and it corrected the previous figure by a factor of 3. Every foundational fact about this animal is younger than most of the people watching this. We have known that a blue whale's heart beats twice a minute for about the same length of time that we have had folding phones. And there is a version of that which is bleak, and I do not want to leave you with it, because I do not think it is the true one. Here is the true one. The blue whale is not hiding. It is simply not ours. Everything we have talked about tonight describes an animal that owes us nothing and has never had any use for us. It became enormous 4.5 million years ago because the ice made the ocean lumpy, and that had nothing to do with anybody. It runs its heart at 2 beats a minute in the dark, at the absolute limit of what a heart can do, and it did not need us to measure it in order to do it. It eats 16 million shrimp a day and fertilizes the water that grows them, and it was doing that for 4 million years before anyone noticed the ocean was being farmed. It sings below the range of human hearing, into a channel in the deep that carries its voice across an ocean basin, and its whole species is quietly lowering that voice, decade after decade, for a reason none of us can work out and none of them need to explain. And when we took 99.85% of them and then stopped and had no idea how to fix what we had done, they went back to South Georgia on their own and taught each other the way. We have never been necessary to any of it. That is not a sad fact. I think it is the most restful fact in this entire video, and it is why I wanted to end here. We are used to being the main character. Everything we look at in terms of what it means for us. And then there is this, an animal larger than any dinosaur, alive right now, in enormous water, doing things we have only just learned to detect, for reasons that have nothing to do with us at all, and it will carry on doing them tonight, whether or not anybody is watching. So here is where I would like to leave you. Somewhere out there right now it is dark and cold, And about 200 meters down, there is an animal there, 30 meters long. Its mouth is closed. Its heart contracted about 20 seconds ago and will not contract again for another 10. 16 million shrimp are somewhere in the water above it, and it knows exactly where because its mother showed it a long time ago. It is not lonely. It is not lost. It is not waiting for anything. In a few minutes, it will rise, slowly, and break the surface, and take a breath you would hear from a kilometer away, and go back down. And somewhere across 1,000 kilometers of black water, another one of them is singing at a frequency you cannot hear, slightly lower than its mother did, for reasons nobody on Earth can explain. They have been doing this since before there were people. They were doing it while we invented the harpoon and while we stopped using it. They are doing it now while you are lying there with the light off. The largest animal that has ever lived is out there in the dark tonight, and it is perfectly fine, and it does not know you exist. Sleep well. My dear sleep science lovers, could you please say in the comments where you're watching from right now? Also, good news. Simple Sleepy Science episodes are now available for free on Spotify. Use the link in the description or on the channel profile to enjoy our stories there.